Alright, it's time for another quick tech. I've got a cool bass on the bench today. This is a 79 Fender P, and as you can see, someone's fitted a gold anodized aluminium pickguard to the bass. These pickguards I think first emerged way back at the very dawn of the P bass as we know it, back in 1957 when it was redesigned. Of course, before 57 the P bass had a slab body and a single coil pickup and a sort of smaller headstock design, but in 57 it was completely redesigned, and well, it's become an icon, this design. Fender did reissue the 57s, I think, right through the 80s and on into the 90s too, I think. In fact, by the 90s, I think they were made in Japan, but don't quote me. As far as I can tell, this is like a genuine Fender spare part, designed, you know, as a replacement for one of those reissues, or if you're lucky enough to have one of the ones from the late 50s. It's a very nice fit around the pickups, and it's quite a nice fit around the neck heel as well. However, it has one kind of quirk, and it's something I just discovered today actually, and that is that it only has 10 screw holes around its perimeter. Standard Fender precision bass pickguards actually have 13 holes around the edge. Luckily enough though, if you are planning to retrofit a gold anodized pickguard to your bass, well, most likely 9 of those 10 holes will line up, or at least be very close to the existing holes. A couple of these were a little bit off center and I've filled them and re-drilled them, but for the most part they'll line up with the other holes. There's a hole missing here, and there's a hole missing here. Down here though, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, and that's because, well, as you can see, there's a hole between these two pots, and a standard pickguard has a single hole next to each pot just here. And with this bass, well, there was a problem, and that's because the center of this hole lined up with the edge of the route, so there was really no timber to put a screw into. At first I thought I could try something a little bit cheeky, like just, you know, cutting the head off a screw and gluing it to the pickguard so it kind of looked right. But no, I got rid of that idea pretty quickly, because I really think the pickguard needs to be fastened here. You've only got a screw hole here, and the material is quite flexible, and you know, you're plugging in and out of the jack all the time, so it does need to be fastened here. So I'll show you what I've done. So as you can see, I've just created a timber boss here to take the pickguard screw. There's a couple of approaches. At first I thought I would just actually trim away some of this original timber and then glue in a piece. Trouble with that is there's not a lot of real estate here right next to the edge of the pickguard, and you know, you run the risk of chipping out the finish or whatever. Oh, look, I think that probably would have worked okay, but what I ended up doing was actually gluing initially a piece of timber to the side of the route, and I just started with a little, sort of like a chunky little piece like that, roughly cut. There is a slight curve here, and I got that pretty close. Then it was a matter of gluing that to the side of the route, and the trouble there is that these basses in this era have a very hard sort of high build clear polyester finish first applied to the timber, and it's, like I say, it's very hard and it bonds to the timber very strongly. But for the shading, they just use nitrocellulose over the top, and it kind of sticks, but it doesn't really strongly bond to that. And if you glue anything like that to that, there's a very good chance it'll just snap off just very easily. So I had to remove some of that nitrocellulose very neatly in this sort of rectangular area, and the way to do that is with acetone. It'll just basically wipe straight off, and I just did it with a cotton bud or two and some acetone. After that, I've just gone ahead and sort of scratched up that very hard polyester underneath, bit of, you know, 120 grit, and I think I also kind of cross-hatched it a bit with the tip of a Stanley blade, and then I've glued this on with epoxy. I probably could have got away with super glue, or certainly gel super glue, but it was the end of the day and I was happy to let it set overnight. And the epoxy is nice because it just fills any voids, gives you plenty of working time, so I can kind of slip this around and get it into exactly the right position. And also, even though this looks like a fairly simple curve, it's actually a slightly complex shape, and that's because there's a huge overspray of that polyester, and the sides of the rad actually kind of bulge and have this sort of funny shape. So the epoxy's worked really well. And then this morning what I've done, well, I've done the second stage of this, and I'm not sure if you can see, but there's actually, if I move the light, you might be able to see, there's actually a doweling. I've actually drilled and glued a doweling in. And that's because even with this, you know, firmly epoxied, with the screw going right into the glue seam there, even with the pilot hole, there is a chance that the screw will just sort of wedge those two apart and kind of cleave it open and just blow it out. So what I've done, I've actually drilled, like I say, a 6mm hole, and I've glued in a small piece of hardwood doweling. To drill this, I've not used a standard twist drill because they can tend to grab and pull themselves into the timber, and again, that's a risk of blowing it out. Instead, what I've used is a brad point bit. You'll be able to drill across those two pieces of timber with a lot more control. And I've just glued that in with tight bond and then paired the top of it off with a nice sharp chisel. Once that was in, then I just kind of finessed this sort of chunky piece of timber into a nicer shape, again with a good sharp chisel and a little bit of sandpaper. That's not just for aesthetics, it's also to make sure you've got plenty of clearance for the pots under here. They are the big old original pots with the wiring and this giant ceramic capacitor. And as you can see, the final step, the final thing I've done, kind of unnecessary because of course it's hidden. I've decided to just put some stain on that, and I've just mixed a little bit of Jarrah stain with a drop of black and actually a drop of green, just to get this kind of khaki coloured stain. And again, I've just applied that with a cotton bud. So, well, I just think it looks a bit nicer. Maybe it's over the top, but yeah, I think it looks a bit nicer. So now I'm drilling into the doweling, and I'm not risking sort of blowing that off the side. Putting a screw into end grain in something like a doweling, it's not always the best decision, to be honest, but of course this is not structural or anything, so it'll be absolutely fine. So now I can go ahead and just very gently center punch that, drill a pilot hole. I've already serviced the electronics. I put a new jack in, redid some of the very old and dry solder joints that are 45 years old, and done some other bits and pieces in there as well. So I can go ahead and lightly and very carefully center punch this, drill my pilot hole, and then just get this buttoned up. So now I've just got to do the final polish on the fretwork. Neck needs a shim, then I can give the bass a little setup, and well, I guess that means this 45-year-old bass, designed 67 years ago, well, I think she's probably got a couple more gigs in her yet. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.